This conference will now be recorded.
Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the 13th episode of the Hooved Animal Humane Society's Saturday Seminar Series. Each month, we are very lucky to have experts educate us on topics near and dear to our hearts as horse owners and lovers. All of our webinars are recorded and posted on HAHS's YouTube channel. Be sure to subscribe to get notifications when the latest episode is updated, and you can share them then with your barnmates, friends, boarders, classmates. Today we are talking about equine nutrition with Robin Stewart, who is an award-winning faculty member at the University of Georgia Cooperative Extension. She previously worked for Purina, I can never pronounce that, Animal Nutrition, giving her years of practical experience helping horse owners daily to figure out their feed questions. She has a master's degree in equine science and is currently working on her doctorate. So she really loves this topic. Robin has earned state and national awards for her educational programs and consultations with over 7,000 residents of the county that she serves. She has conducted research projects on drinking water quality and forage quality and value, and written numerous articles for state and national magazines. We are so excited to have her sharing her experience and knowledge with us today. Welcome, Robin.
Thank you so much, Jenny. Appreciate it.
So we're going to turn this over to you. Okay.
While she does that, can I ask where everybody is from? If you want to drop that in the chat box, I'd love to hear. All right. Minnesota, Illinois. Awesome. So you guys have real winter. California, Maine, Missouri, all over the country. That's awesome. Well, again, thank you guys for taking the time to log in today. I know Jenny's done a great job putting this series together and providing these educational opportunities to horse owners and enthusiasts. As she said, my name is Robin Stewart. I'm a county agent with the University of Georgia. I've been here for almost 4 years, and most of my work as a county agent has been focused on livestock production and management, and then small farm development. So those are kind of the two things I do a lot of work in. My passion is horses. It always has been. Prior to this, I worked for Purina, as she mentioned, for a couple of years as a regional sales manager. Before that, I was in graduate school in my bachelor's degree program and all that. So I did grow up riding horses, and I've done a little bit of everything. So I started riding hunter equitation when I was about 8 years old. Did that for a number of years, rode on a high school equestrian team, then made a swap actually into eventing when I was in high school. And then from there, I went to graduate school, met this gelding in this picture. This is my horse, Webb. And he and I made the switch to ranch riding and reining. And we've also dabbled in parades, in flag bearing, and side saddle and fox hunting. You name it, we've tried it, and we've had a whole lot of fun doing it. So lifelong horse lover. Happy to be here. Equine nutrition is one of my favorite things to talk about. And today, we're going to cover a lot of ground. So I hope that you are prepared for a lot of information, but I do want to preface that I'm going to share the slides as well as some additional resources and websites with Jenny. So don't worry too much about trying to capture every little piece of this. We are going to make sure that you have this resource available to you in the future. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and get started. So the first thing that I just want to mention is what makes an equine nutritionist. So if you are looking for assistance with your horse's diet, if you're looking for help, I just want to recognize that the only 2 people in the US that are truly recognized as equine nutritionists are individuals that have a doctoral degree or a PhD in equine nutrition, and veterinary doctors who have certifications in equine nutrition. Those are really the only 2 classes of people that I consider to be equine nutritionists. Those are also the only 2 people that most of the scientific community considers to be equine nutritionists. And that doesn't mean that there aren't other resources, right? We have other individuals that can certainly still be helpful. I know that there are some third-party certifications out there that are providing people like feed consultation type titles. You know, Jenny herself was telling me she's taken some equine nutrition courses, so those are certainly things that can make people more knowledgeable about nutrition. And then some of your feed representatives. So individuals that work for brands, like I did for Purina, typically they are going to get some education in nutrition as part of that job. So they may have some knowledge. But I just want to point this out because I am technically not an equine nutritionist by my own definition. With that said, I've done a lot of research in nutrition. I've done a lot of hands-on work in the feed industry. And then now in extension, I do a lot of work with education. So consider myself a fairly skilled nutritionist, but still would not call myself that title in terms of claiming it. But if you're looking for nutrition help, just wanted to clarify this because this is something that I see kind of pop up on social media here and there of folks looking for help and looking for resources and making sure that we're all on the same page in terms of what a nutritionist is. The other thing here is that some nutritionists are tied to a brand, right? And that's not necessarily a bad thing. I know a lot of people look for independent nutritionists or people who are not associated with a company. And by all means, you can do that. But typically, even if they're working for a brand, those people are going to be very knowledgeable in the context of what they're doing and why they're recommending things. So just wanted to cover this. I am not a nutritionist by title, but it is something I have a lot of practical experience in. And I do quite a bit of nutrition consulting just for kind of for fun. As an employee of the University of Georgia, I'm not able to do that as a profit-making kind of enterprise. So I do help people who have interest in working with me on developing their diets, and would encourage any of you who are interested in that to contact me if you need help. So lots of resources out there. But I say this to start because today's presentation, I'm going to walk through what a consultation looks like. So if you come to me and you need nutrition help, let's talk about the things that I'm thinking about and the ways that I structure that consultation. So there's 4 things that I do when somebody comes to me and needs nutrition help. So these are the steps that I look at. The first step is I want to understand your horse and your goals. So those are really important, right? I really need to understand your horse and their background, and I need to understand what you're trying to accomplish. From there, we can then walk through some steps of actually selecting a feed product and developing a diet for your horse. And then the last step, which most people forget about, is making sure we give it enough time. So today's presentation, we're going to walk through each of these steps in more detail and the things that I'm looking for. And as Jenny mentioned, we'll have some built-in time for questions and for brain breaks because it's a lot of content, okay? So first and foremost, I need to know your horse. And if you're doing any kind of nutrition work, you really need to understand what we're working with. And when it comes to knowing your horse, I think of knowing horses as a species and knowing horses as an individual. So since I've been doing this a long time, I don't think quite as much about the species side, just because we've done a lot of, I've done a lot of classes. I know a lot about the anatomy and the essential nutrient requirements and the physiology and how that influences our feeding practices. But when I do a nutrition consult, I really want to know your horse as an individual. And that means recognizing things like basic information, their age, their breed, their gender. It means talking about their medical history, whether they have any medical diagnosis we need to feed, what their current or old diet has been. So, what are they eating? What have they eaten in the past? What were the decisions driving any changes to that? Their body condition score. So does your horse weigh what it should? and then their workload. And I, as a nutritionist, focus actually a little bit less on workload, more because I hear people, more because most of the horses I work with are not really particularly performance horses. I get a lot of horses kind of like mine that are semi-retired or that get ridden here and there, but are not really working intensely. So when I do nutrition work, these are the things that I'm really thinking about from an individual standpoint. All right. I don't want to go too far in the weeds on some of these things, but I do want to kind of set a foundation of why we feed horses the way we do, and that means looking at them as a species. And the first thing I want to talk about is the digestive tract. Now, there are a lot of great resources on this online. There's a lot of presentations that walk through the entire digestive tract. So I only have one slide here. I know it's really busy, but I'm going to point out some of the key things that we think about and ultimately what it means for feeding practices. So the first thing is the mouth. So the horse's mouth is going to be what they, snip off grass, pick up hay, pick up feed. They're going to chew that feed stuff. They're going to mix it with saliva, and then they're going to swallow it into the rest of the digestive system. One of the most key parts about the mouth is that chewing and saliva production, and we'll talk about why that's so important in just a minute. But what I want you to know is that your horse chews more when they're eating a forage diet, so hay or pasture or forage alternatives. The more chewing a horse does, the more saliva they produce, okay? And that's why we want to encourage our horses to eat a lot of fiber, and we want to encourage them to eat frequently, okay? The esophagus is the second part of the digestive tract, and it is essentially the tube that connects the mouth to the stomach. There's two kind of unique things about the esophagus in horses. The first is that it is a separate passage from the airway or the trachea. So a horse can choke and it will not affect their respiration, but choke is fairly common. Horses do choke fairly regularly. And horses that have choked may need some different feeding practices compared to one that hasn't. And we're not going to go a lot into that, but just be aware that they can choke. And then the second thing is that the esophagus has a sphincter, the pyloric sphincter on the stomach end, that prevents feed from returning up it. So essentially, horses cannot throw up. Once they have committed to eating something, it is committed. It now has to pass through the rest of the digestive tract. So making sure that we're feeding quality things and keeping our horses out of toxic weeds or things that might be causes of gastrointestinal upset. The third organ is the stomach. The horse's stomach is fairly small, between 1 and 4 gallons. And the stomach really is only there to help mix feed and continue its passage into the rest of the digestive tract. So you're going to get the feed stuff coming from the mouth through the esophagus into the stomach. It's going to get mixed up with some enzymes and with stomach acid, which is hydrochloric acid. And that is going to be secreted all the time. And that's a little bit unique. So most species, like us humans, we are secreting our stomach acid really when we're thinking about food or when we're about to eat, and the horse is doing it all the time. And so when you think about that saliva production from the mouth, the saliva is so important because it is a buffer, and it buffers that stomach acid to make it less acidic, which helps the rest of the digestive tract to flow more smoothly. And what you'll see is in modern horses, we have a lot of trouble with horses that are not chewing as much. They're on kind of that high concentrate diet. They're not producing enough saliva. They're sitting with empty stomachs, and they've got all this stomach acid that is then causing things like gastric ulcers. So really at this point, we've seen we need the chewing, we need the constant eating for the saliva production that is going to buffer the stomach acid. Okay, that's two of the biggest points here. From the stomach, the feed is going to go into the small intestine. And the small intestine is really where we see the majority of our digestion and absorption of nutrients. So feed can spend anywhere upwards of 6 to 8 hours in the small intestine, going through that digestion and absorption process. After the small intestine, we have the cecum, and the cecum is the organ that makes horses what we call a hindgut fermenter. And it is the organ where the horse has a big population of microbes, so things like bacteria and protozoa, And those microbes are responsible for breaking down the fiber components of the diet. So I'm going to take you back to like 5th grade biology, and we learned about animal cells and we learned about plant cells. And the big difference between the two is that a plant cell has the cell wall, which is made up of structural carbohydrates. And we'll hear more about those in a few minutes. But that cecum is where those structural carbohydrates get broken down, that cell wall is broken down into volatile fatty acids that can be used for energy. So that is why horses can eat things like grass and pasture and actually get a lot of energy out of them. And that process takes quite a bit of time, so about 7 hours. The cecum also is very sensitive to changes in carbohydrates. So that's why when we talk about feeding horses, we are usually a little bit concerned about maintaining a fairly low non-structural carbohydrate level because those can cause some problems with that microbial population. But what I really want to get out of this is that the cecum is the fermentation vat. That is where your horse is going to digest the fiber parts of its diet. And then it's going to move into the large and small colon. We have some absorption of nutrients there, but really the large and small colon is for water absorption. So forming that fecal matter, forming that manure, and then the rectum is just going to hold on to that manure until the horse excretes it. So ultimately, I say all of this to get down to the red sentence at the bottom that your horse is physiologically designed to eat often, so lots of small meals, and they're designed to eat really high fiber. And so those are two of the biggest principles that we need to keep in mind when we talk about horse diets. The next part is talking about nutrients. So I want to make sure we're all on the same page because I know we kind of throw a lot of these terms around and people may not really know what it means. But a nutrient is any substance that provides nourishment for the growth and maintenance of life. And when we talk about nutrition, we talk a lot about essential nutrients. And what makes an essential nutrient different from any nutrient is that an essential nutrient is one that the body cannot make or cannot make in enough quantity. It means the horse or the human or whatever animal we're talking about has to eat it in the diet. And it's interesting because we do have nutrients that are not essential. So if you think about humans, we make our own vitamin D, right? If you spend enough time in the sunshine, your body will make vitamin D for you. Our horses, for example, because of that fermentation process, the microbes actually produce enough B vitamins usually. So usually we don't have to supplement horses with B vitamins because they can make them on their own. So just recognize essential nutrients are nutrients required for life that the body cannot make, and that we need nutrients in both macro amounts, so large quantities, and micro amounts, or small quantities. And if we are going to have a dietary issue, the majority of the time, it's going to be an imbalance in micronutrients or a lack of energy, in my personal experience. So when we talk about nutrients in an animal's diet or in a horse's diet, we want to start with the nutrient requirements. So the nutrient requirement is the amount of each nutrient that is needed by the animal to maintain their life, to maintain their workload, to maintain their purpose, right? And the requirement of nutrients that your horse has are going to depend. It depends on the size of the animal, it depends on their purpose. A broodmare has different nutrient requirements than a pasture horse. And what I want you to take away here is that when we build a horse diet, we are usually building the diet based on the nutrient requirements. And the nutrient requirements are published, recognized values. So the NRC, the National Research Council, has the nutrient requirements for horses textbook. And that book is basically a compilation of all of the peer-reviewed research in equine nutrition that provides our standardized nutrient requirements based on those things like size and purpose. When you develop a feed from a company, so like if Purina builds a horse feed, if somebody's formulating a diet for you, or if you're just trying to determine if your horse is meeting its nutrient requirements, that is the best place to start, is those standardized published values, because those are the basis that we know based on the research. My only criticism here, and something I do like to recognize, is that the NRC for horses was published in 2006. I have been hoping for many years that we are going to get an updated version that includes all of our more modern research, because we do have more information than we did almost 2 decades ago, right? So I'm hopeful that that'll get updated, but truly, if you're working on nutrition, that is your good starting point. And then from there, we can look for modern research that tells us more about other nutrients. So we can look at some of the modern research into amino acids. We can look at modern research at vitamin E supplementation, and we can make some modifications to the diet based on what we have in the peer-reviewed science. But NRC still remains kind of our baseline of where we look to determine what nutrients your horse needs. When it comes to nutrients, there are 6 essential nutrients that we talk about in any living things diet. The first that we're not going to talk much about today is water, but hopefully you know your horse needs access to fresh, clean water all the time, usually between 10 and 20 gallons a day, depending on the horse's size and the climate. Then we have 2 macronutrients, or nutrients needed in large amounts, that provide energy. And those are carbohydrates and fats. And I'm going to start with carbohydrates. So we have 2 types of carbohydrates in the equine diet. We have structural carbohydrates, those carbohydrates that are the fiber component. And then we have non-structural carbohydrates, which are our sugars and starches. And I just want to recognize that those non-structural carbohydrates are essential. I know a lot of people look for a low carbohydrate diet or a low NSC diet, but they are required in the diet to some extent. Okay, so carbohydrates, we have structural and non-structural. Those are going to be the biggest provider of energy in the diet. Then we have fat. And horses can digest fat. They are interesting because they don't actually have a gallbladder, but they do produce bile. They do digest fat into energy pretty efficiently. And that can be a great way of adding calories to the diet. And we'll talk a little bit about some of the ways to do that in a few minutes. But with fat, just the one thing I do want everybody to know is that you can feed a lot of calories by feeding fat. You can feed a lot of energy, but fat is not going to provide any of the vitamins or minerals or anything else. So just keep in mind that adding fat to a diet, you still need to make sure that you're providing the other 5 nutrients here. Fat and carbohydrates as energy first and foremost. Then we have protein. And a lot of times our olden day folk or folks that grew up maybe more traditionally think that protein is an energy source, and it should not be. It can be in certain situations, but protein is very expensive. It's not an efficient energy source. So most horses are not going to want to use protein to provide that energy. They're going to use the carbohydrates and fats first. Protein instead is going to be used for physiological processes. It's for muscle development. It's for skin and hair and hoof growth and things like that. Most adult horses at maintenance that are on a good forage program are usually not going to be deficient in protein. So that's a macronutrient that we tend to meet pretty well. And I think sometimes people worry a lot about meeting protein needs when that's usually less of a concern in most of the horses I'm looking at. Then we have vitamins and minerals, and I'm not going to go super in depth into those, but those are micronutrients, so they're needed at lower amounts. And they're important for a whole vast number of physiological functions. So everything from fluid regulation to muscle function and all kinds of other things. So most of the times with vitamins and minerals, we're really trying to make sure that we have enough of them in the diet and that they are properly balanced to one another. So these are your 6 essential nutrients that your horse needs in its diet. This is probably one of my favorite slides I ever came up with. And the reason for it is that I think when we talk about equine nutrition, we get in the weeds a lot, and we kind of get to a place where we're losing sight of what our ultimate goal is. So our ultimate goal when we are building a diet for a horse is to find the middle ground between what your horse needs based on the requirements and what we want as humans and horse owners. Your horse's needs are those 6 essential nutrients that I just talked about in the 5 welfare freedoms. If you are meeting those 2 things, then from a welfare and a nutrition standpoint, you are meeting your horse's needs. Now, human wants sometimes have good basis in reason, right? So let's say your horse is allergic to an ingredient, then by all means, we're going to want a diet with specific ingredients. But a lot of times I see horse owners that want specific things in their diet for a reason that is not necessarily to the benefit of their horse, right? So they want a probiotic in their diet because they think it's helpful. By all means, there's nothing wrong with that, but we don't have any science that says a probiotic actually benefits the horse. So that might be something that is more of a human want than a horse need, okay? So just remember when we're building a diet, if you can kind of make the list of things that your horse actually needs and then the things that you want as a horse owner, that makes developing the diet a lot easier. That brings us to step 2, know your horse. So the first thing is, what is your goal? Are you trying to change your body condition score? Are you trying to improve performance? Are you trying to manage a medical issue? Or is there something else? Sometimes I have folks that just want to simplify their diet, right? They want to know that they're doing the best they can and they need help doing that. If you're sitting here going, my horse is in great shape, but I have no problems, I might not recommend a change, right? So you don't have to change something just because you see something on social media or you see something out of a feed company. Really make sure that when you're making nutrition changes, you're making them for a reason or for a purpose. And I would just make the argument that there's a lot of horses out there that are not in the best nutrition shape, right? They might be getting a handful of feed for the fat pony down the road, and that pony is going to do just fine and they're going to live forever. Very much like people, I'm sure I don't meet half of my nutritional needs. That's okay, right? To my knowledge, I'm fairly healthy. So I just make the argument that a horse that's not eating a perfectly nutritionally balanced diet doesn't necessarily mean it's going to have major crazy effects on their health immediately or long term. But if you really want to dial in the diet and do everything you can, then by all means, we can certainly do that. And there's no right way there. The last thing on this slide is just remember that your horse has nutrient requirements, not ingredient requirements. So everything you feed your horse is going to be providing some combination of nutrients to them. So for example, if I want to feed like a beet pulp has some protein, it has some vitamins and minerals, it has some fat, it has a lot of structural carbohydrates. So we're providing nutrients by feeding that feed stuff. So just remember that of everything you put in the diet is there to serve a purpose from a nutrient standpoint. We're going to take an aside here, and I promise there's a break coming up after this. But one of the things that I use as when I do nutrition consults is body condition scoring. And it's a skill that I think every single person who has a horse should be able to do. I have a whole nother talk on this, so this is the abridged version, but I will send it to Jenny to include with the month's notes. When we talk about horses, we can talk about their weight and we can talk about their body condition score. The weight is the actual physical weight of the animal, and we can get that with 3 different methods. We can actually put them on a scale, which is the most accurate method. We can use a weight tape, which you can either purchase from a feed store or usually get from a feed representative, or we can do a calculation using like a measuring tape and a couple of measurements on the horse's body. The actual physical weight of the animal is really useful for a couple of things. So it's really helpful for medication and deworming, right? Usually your dosages are based off of weight. If you have no idea what your horse weighs, you can't accurately dose them. The other thing it's really helpful for is a lot of these kind of nutrition calculations and meeting the requirements on a feed bag. So Usually instructions for feeding will say feed X amount per 100 pounds of body weight. And you'll notice as I start getting into more applied feeding, a lot of it is percentages of body weight. If you don't know the weight, you're going to have a hard time doing some of that math. So physical weight is important for some things, but if I tell you my horse weighs 1,000 pounds, it doesn't tell you very much, right? I could have a really, really fat pony or a really, really skinny big horse, right? So saying your horse weighs 1,000 pounds doesn't give enough context to whether your horse weighs what it should. And that is where the Henneke body condition scoring system comes into play. And I'm hopeful that you will have heard of this before, but if you haven't, this is a system that was developed at Texas A&M in the 90s, maybe the 80s. And it is a objective scoring system that evaluates the body fat on the animal. It is valid in a court of law. It should work the same no matter who is doing the scoring process. And it uses both a visual and a physical or tactile method of use. So you have to look at the horse and you have to get hands on the horse. I would say if a horse is a lower body condition score, sometimes you can score just on visual assessment of landmarks. But as the horses get heavier, that gets much more difficult to do, and you really do need to get hands-on with it. This is a skill. It does take time to learn, so I would encourage you to practice this and do this fairly frequently. But ultimately, if you come to me wanting help with your horse, I'm going to say, what kind of body condition is your horse in, and what kind of body condition do you want your horse to be? So the body condition scoring scale is a 1 to a 9, with a 1 being very thin and a 9 being very overweight. And ideal is anywhere between a 4 and a 6. I'm a purist. I think ideal is a 5, but we'll talk about some scenarios where a 4 or a 6 might be appropriate. As I mentioned, we're evaluating the fat deposition in 6 areas. So the crest of the neck, the withers, behind the elbow, along the ribs, along the spine, and at the tailhead. And depending on how you're taught, some people are taught to score each individual part of the horse on that 1 to 9 scale and then compile them into a single score for the whole animal. I was taught just to evaluate all of those places kind of comprehensively and build myself a score that way. So a couple of different ways that people are taught, but the concept is exactly the same and the results should be the same. As I said, I'm trying to kind of give you an overview here, but I broke these horses into 3 categories. We have thin, ideal, and overweight. So our thin horses are scores of 1 to 3. And if you have a horse that is a body condition score of a 1 or a 2, you need to be working with a veterinarian unless you have extensive rehabilitation experience. These horses are basically walking skeletons. You can see every bone in their body. You can see their vertebrae down their spine. You can see the little lip of bone in the middle of the scapula. And these horses, if you don't feed them properly to get them back into better condition, you can kill them. So if you are not experienced with it, or if you wind up in a situation where you have this low of a score, you do need to work with professional help. We have some great protocols from UC Davis on refeeding these really emaciated horses, but they are beyond kind of an average person's ability to do without support and assistance. Body condition score of 3 is still very thin, but this is kind of in an area where we can feed this horse safely. Body condition score of thin, we can no longer see each individual vertebrae. Now their spine has kind of filled in. We can still see a lot of their ribs, but they have put on some weight even though they don't have much fat cover anymore. So these horses are thin, but they're not quite as emergency cases as those 1s and 2s. From a score of a 4 to a 6, these are what I said are more ideal type horses. The marker that I look for here is body condition score of 4. You can still see some of those ribs and you can visualize them. Once you get up to a body condition score of a 5, you should no longer be able to see those ribs. But if you were to run your hand over that horse's side, they'll be really evident to the touch. So Obviously, these horses are in better condition. They're not overweight, they're not super thin. Then we have a body condition score of a 6, and this is where it's tough to do from a photo. This is where we really start needing to get hands on these horses, because these horses are going to have more fat cover over their ribs, a little bit more fat at their tail head. And the other thing, if you're in person with these horses, what you can look for is that a horse that is a 4 or lower is going to do what we call a tent. So their spine down their back, they have no fat on either side of their spine. So they tent like this, and then an ideal body condition starts to be level. And then as we start getting more overweight, a 6 and higher, we start to get kind of a divot down the back, or like a rain gutter. And depending on how overweight that horse is, that gutter gets more pronounced. So a 4 to a 6 can be ideal depending on the situation. And then we have our chunky monkeys. And these horses, I think we should be just as worried about as our thin horses, because we do have a lot of metabolic issues and a lot of nutritional issues that come about when we overcondition horses. They're just not made to be this overweight. You know, you look at their legs, they're not made to carry that. So these horses all just have growing levels of fat deposition in those 6 areas. You know, they have that rain gutter down the back. I would say I've seen 7s and 8s in person. I don't know that I've ever seen a 9 in person. But these horses, again, you really need hands-on in order to tell exactly where they are on the scale. So as I said, I wanted to mention why the ideal varies a little bit. The best example I have of a body condition score of 4 being ideal is a working thoroughbred or a racing thoroughbred. These horses are lean, mean muscle machines. They are working intensively hard. And we don't want those horses to be overweight, right? They're putting a lot of pressure on their bodies already. So we want to make sure that we are giving them you know, enough nutrition to support performance, but not making them overly heavy. So you'll see thoroughbreds that are 4s regularly, not anything I'm concerned about. Then these other 3 are all just examples of different types of horse. Honestly, without getting hands on them, I would not be able to tell you exactly what their scores are, but I would argue they're all at least a 5 because you cannot see any ribs, and they're probably, if I had to guess, 1 or 2 of them might be a 6. But these are examples of heavier horses that are ideal, that show why the body condition score is important, right? Because they're all different breeds, they're all different types, they're put together very differently, but they are all in good, healthy body condition, okay? So body condition scoring is something you ought to be doing to your horse regularly. It's a great skill and tool to know how to use, and if you come asking for nutrition help, I'm gonna ask you what your horse's body condition score is, so get comfortable with that. Okay, we're gonna pause and take questions. I know that was a lot of information, but here are kind of the 2 things I really want you to take home. We need to feed our horses for digestive anatomy first and foremost. So small, frequent forage-based meals. And then a primary goal of your feeding program is to meet the essential nutrient needs of your horse and to reach and maintain their ideal body condition score. And I say that because body condition score is an easy visual and tactile marker of your horse meeting, at the very least, its energy needs, and hopefully most of its other needs as well. Good question. Is age taken into consideration? So age itself is not, but what we do think about is, you know, conformational things. So for example, if you have a broodmare that is heavily pregnant and showing some rib, because she's got that giant baby in her belly that's pulling kind of her abdomen down and showing some of that rib, but every other part of that horse scores as a 6, you would not score that horse as a 4. So it goes back to kind of scoring those individual parts of the horse to see what the overall score is for it, if that makes sense. But age itself does not. You know, we can do the opposite and say we know some of our senior horses lose muscling over their top lines. That should not really impact their score because, again, we're looking at that fat deposition, but it can influence how they look. And that's why getting that visual and tactile assessment is so important. Do we have other questions on digestive anatomy or essential nutrients, or kind of what we're trying to accomplish from a understanding wants and needs? So Marcy, I don't have the top line system in here because that is a system that I don't know of any research that is peer reviewed that has really been done into it. I know that it's been developed, I believe it was originally developed by Neutrina, but I could be wrong. But that is one that I would put into the toolbox as potentially useful. But again, I don't know that we have a lot of peer-reviewed research in it yet. So it's tough to say there. The other scoring system that is scientifically backed that we have peer-reviewed research in is actually the crusty neck scoring system. And I do have some resources I can send about that, but that is looking at horses that are metabolically prone to issues. And we do have some scientifically proven ways of scoring those horses and kind of making some decisions based on that. And to be honest, I'm not as knowledgeable on that crusty neck scoring system, but it does exist. So top line scoring system, I'd have to look. Again, I don't know it's peer reviewed at all, but I can look and see. And if it is, I can send some resources out after the fact. Okay, watery bowel, which I'm assuming you're considering fecal water syndrome. We're going to get more into selecting feeds in a minute, but from a digestive anatomy standpoint, what I'm most familiar with is that horses that tend to have looser manure, it's not usually a gastric issue, so it's not related to problems in the stomach. Usually it's related to kind of some mechanical issues in the hindgut. So the first thing that I like to try is putting that horse on a forage only pellet type diet. So instead of allowing that horse to eat hay and grass, I put them on a full diet of a forage pellet. And the reasoning behind that is that that forage pellet is already mechanically digested for them. So if they are having that fecal water because their hindgut is irritated because of the forage component of the diet, then trying the pellet diet can actually reduce that fecal water almost entirely. That's something that I like to try. From there, I know there's a lot of research being done in this. I think the challenge is that there's a lot of causes of it. You know, we've got some people saying it's due to microbiome issues. You have some people like myself that like to look at mechanical issues. You know, and I don't know that we have a true one size fits all on that front, but I like to try that kind of elimination of the long stem forage to see if we can help reduce that issue. And then if doing that forage pellet actually gets rid of the fecal water, then that tells me that the hay quality and the long stem fiber is an issue for that animal. Good question. All right, if everybody is feeling good, we're gonna keep on keeping on. I told you there's a lot of content here, so we're getting there. All right. So once I have an understanding of your horse as a species, your horse as an individual, and I understand what you're trying to accomplish, then we can talk about building the diet and what the equine diet looks like. And when I build a diet, this is the pyramid I use. So I'm going to start with forage every single time. If you ever meet a equine nutritionist or someone who does nutrition work who doesn't focus on forage first and doesn't ask you anything about the forage part of the diet, that's probably not a good sign. I have had people get upset with me because they want me just to recommend a feed product, and I want to know all about their background and their goals in the forage part of the diet before I even talk about feed. And the reason for that is that forage is going to be the foundation of every single diet, regardless of age, size, etc. Once we have a good forage program figured out, then we're going to look at concentrates, and then we're going to look at supplements. One of the things that I think is really important to recognize is that concentrates or grains are regulated. There is a AFCO, which is a federal organization that oversees the production and manufacturing of concentrates and grains. So companies are held to standards in terms of those feeds containing what they contain, what kind of claims they're allowed to make about what that feed does, the instructions on feeding, the way that they're manufactured, their processes for handling any kind of issues. All of that is regulated. The difference between a grain and a supplement, and you'll learn through this talk, we're not going to talk a lot about supplements here. I do have a whole presentation I gave on them and kind of my thoughts that I can send out to you guys. But my problem with supplements is they are not regulated at all. It's a free-for-all. If I want to just put something in a bag and sell it as a supplement, I can. You know, there's not any oversight to whether the supplements contain what they say they do. There's no requirement for any science or evidence of that supplement being effective or doing what they claim to do. And there's really not a lot of protection for you as a consumer in the supplement industry. So I tend to be a little bit more skeptical of them. There are certain ones that by all means are great, that we know we have science behind, but supplements to me are very hit or miss, and I prefer to focus on the forage and the concentrate part of the diet. And hopefully if we get that squared away, we don't need the supplements quite as much. So when we build a horse diet, it's important that we know what a horse can actually eat. And I see this sometimes of people feeding their horse, you know, 40, 50 pounds of grain and hay a day, and the horse just isn't getting anything out of that. So what you need to know is that horses will eat between 2.5% and 3% of their body weight every day. Some horses eat a little bit more than that. Some horses eat less than that. Very much depends on the individual. But that's a rough estimate in terms of how much they can actually consume. It's kind of like us, right? Like you could eat a ton of Thanksgiving meal, and then at some point you're just not going to want to eat anymore because you're just too full. Okay, so they do have a limit on what they can eat. And for most diets, we're looking at around 2% to be forage or forage alternatives. And then that remaining 0.5% or percent can be grain or feed, or it can be forage if you're trying to pursue more of a forage-based diet or a forage, you know, forage heavy or grain-free, I guess I should say. So what this means in practical terms, so for a 1,000-pound horse, we're looking at roughly 20 pounds in forage, and that remaining 5 to 10 pounds can be in feed. And again, those numbers are flexible. You may have a horse that eats 1 pound of feed and 29 pounds of forage. It just is going to depend a little bit on what you're trying to do and what your horse is willing to eat. But I did want to give kind of a guideline of what the maximum is of being roughly 30 pounds for a 1,000-pound horse. So as I mentioned, forage is the building block of every single equine diet. Don't care what the horse is. The absolute bare minimum of forage we want to feed is going to be 1.5% of body weight. I know that's different from the 2% on the last slide, and the reason for that is 2% is really more ideal. That's really what we want to have. But if you have an overweight horse, you can drop it down to 1.5% safely and not have any problems. So that's the limit in terms of maintaining gut mobility and gut health, is that 1.5% or 15 pounds for a 1,000-pound horse. The second piece here, something you'll hear me say several times today, is that you need to feed by weight. And this is true for forage, it is true for feed, it is true for everything you give your horse. And when we talk about forage, I'm going to focus today primarily on hay, just because pasture is more difficult to track how much the horse eats. It's a little bit more difficult for a lot of horse owners that are boarding to control anything about pasture. So we're going to focus a little bit more on hay because most horse owners have more ability to do something about hay. But you've got to feed by weight, because if you tell me you're feeding 3 flakes of hay, I don't know if you're feeding 3 flakes of a 40-pound bale or 3 flakes of a 100-pound bale. And that's going to be a pretty big difference between those two numbers, okay? The easiest way of weighing your hay is to go ahead and get just a fishing scale and a bag, like a plastic bag, and you can just put the hay in the bag, hang it on the fishing scale, and see what it weighs. You don't have to do that every single day, but it is good to have a ballpark idea of what the weight is. And the other thing I would encourage you to pay attention to is how much the horse actually eats. Because if you tell me your horse is on 24/7 forage, which is great, That doesn't tell me how much the horse is actually consuming. It just tells me they have hay available all the time. And we have horses too that'll, strew it in the ground and pee on it and poop on it and whatever. So understanding exactly how much the horse is actually eating is really critical. Also going to mention, you need to have dentition checked, their teeth checked regularly, at least once a year. I'm not an equine dentist. I do have a presentation on equine dentistry we can send out, but their integrity of their teeth is going to be very important for the ability to eat and chew and consume forage. So when we talk about forage, and again, focusing more on hay, forage is going to be the largest part of the horse's diet, right? So we said at least 2/3 of the diet is going to be in forage, and it's usually the most variable part of the diet, right? If you feed a commercial feed, typically that product is really consistent from batch to batch. It has to be because it's held to that label in the guaranteed analysis. The forage, it's really up to what you can find and what you can afford. So forage is going to make the biggest difference in the diet. And the quality of forage or hay is going to be influenced by a lot of things. I see a lot of questions over like, is orchard grass better than Bermuda grass, better than whatever? But my number one concern when you look at hay quality is actually the maturity of the hay. It has nothing to do with the species, because you want hay that is fairly immature, that has been harvested when it is young and leafy and easily digestible. Now, assessing forage quality without a forage test is really hard. As I said, some of the things you can look for are things like, is it leafy? Is it really soft? Can you like ball it up in your hands without getting stabbed? Does it smell good? Does it have a lot of seed heads in it? If it has a lot of seed heads, it's usually more mature. Those are good kind of visual assessments if you're able to do that. But really the gold standard here is forage testing. And I recognize a lot of horse owners don't have the ability to forage test, and that's totally fine. But if you don't have the ability to test your hay, I do encourage you to buy hay that has been tested. And the numbers we're really looking for are a moisture of less than 20%. That is a mold issue. That is a spontaneous combustion issue. So we want hay that is well dried. And then we want acid detergent fiber, which is the digestibility of the hay, to be less than 40%. And we want neutral detergent fiber, which is the palatability or the intake of the hay, to be under 60%. So 2, 4, 6. If you follow that guidelines, that hay is going to be reasonable quality for horses. And we'll talk in a few minutes about feeding some different scenarios where we might want some better quality hay versus maybe some lower quality hay. The other thing that we can do is we can provide forage in the form of supplemental products. I have a talk on this as well, but this is all of the things like beet pulp and hay cubes and pellets that we can add to the diet to make up part of this fiber component. And those can be really useful for horses that have dentition issues, or maybe if hay is really expensive, or maybe if you're in a situation where you can't feed more hay, but you still want to feed more fiber. So we do have some options in terms of feeding forage that is not hay or pasture that I encourage people to keep in their back pocket. So once we have the forage part of the diet squared away, and honestly, what I would say the takeaway there is feed enough of it. Make sure you're feeding that 2% per day, and then make sure it's reasonably to good quality hay. Those are the two most critical things on the forage front. Then we can look at concentrates or feeds. And the whole goal of a feed is to provide the nutrients that the horse can't get in the forage. So typically, every horse is going to need some type of supplementation for vitamins and minerals. Our forages just don't contain vitamins and minerals in the right balances and ratios. So that's pretty much across the board. Every horse needs some type of supplement there. And then depending on the horse, we may need more protein, depending on workload, and we might need energy, right? So if you have a horse that just doesn't maintain body condition on good forage, that horse needs energy as well as those vitamins and minerals. And there's all types of formulations and types of feed available, and we're going to talk about those in a few minutes. So the rules I have for this, kind of the take home when I'm thinking about concentrates, is I need you to follow the instructions. And you would be really amazed at the number of people who do not follow feeding instructions. These are on the feed tack for whatever product you choose to feed. It's going to tell you exactly how much to feed your horse based on their size and workload. They're also going to provide a minimum recommended feeding rate that is the bare minimum you can feed of that product to an average maintenance horse. Make sure you follow the instructions. If you're not following the instructions and feeding the correct amount of a product, you are wasting your money because your horse is not getting the nutrition that's guaranteed on the back. You have to feed things correctly. Just like with forage, we need to feed our feeds by weight. Now, if you want to weigh your feed scoop every day, that's great. I'm not opposed. But you can also just weigh a scoop once in a while, make sure it weighs what it should, so that you have some idea of what your horse eats. And the reason for that is volume is not weight, right? So if you come to me and say, I'm feeding a scoop of feed, that doesn't tell me anything about how much you're feeding. I don't know if you're feeding a 3-quart scoop. I don't know if you're feeding a metal coffee can. I don't know if you're feeding a coffee mug, which I've had people feed. So a scoop is not an accurate measure, and a quart is not an accurate measure. We really need weight in pounds in order to be accurate with our feeding decisions. So just keep that in mind, feed by weight, not by volume. All of your recommendations and instructions are going to be based on weight. And then the other guideline here, based on that physiology, is that we don't want to feed any more than 0.5% of the horse's body weight in a meal of grain. You can feed more than that of things like forage alternatives and hay, but we don't want to feed more than 5 pounds in a meal for a 1,000-pound horse. And again, the reason there is that the horse's GI tract just can't digest that quickly enough, so they don't get very much out of it at that point. So smaller, more frequent meals are better. My personal opinion on concentrates is that the exact product you feed is less important than feeding the correct type of product and feeding it correctly. I think a lot of our nutrition problems would be solved if people followed the instructions on the bag and fed feeds the way they're supposed to be fed. Last but not least are supplements. As I said, kind of our goal with supplements is to balance any remaining deficiencies in the diet or to manage some health concerns, but they're not a solution for a poor or inappropriate diet to begin with. And I sometimes see folks throwing a lot of supplements on there that are not necessarily, that are not necessarily beneficial to the horse. And we do have some supplements that can cause harm, right? So sometimes if you something like selenium is very toxic if you feed too much of it. So we can get into some trouble if we overfeed some things. I'm a big proponent of making sure your forage and concentrate is squared away first, and then adding supplements for specific purposes that are research proven and scientifically backed. Did see a question about feeding soaked feed. Everything should always be weighed dry. So your dry beet pulp amount, your dry feed, that's going to be the weight that you're feeding, because the water doesn't provide anything nutritionally other than water. It doesn't provide energy, it doesn't provide protein or anything like that. It is just providing some volume and some water. So big concepts here are: a balanced diet is providing all 6 essential nutrients. Forage is the foundation of every single diet, whether it's pasture or hay or forage alternatives. And then we can feed concentrates and supplements to fill the nutrient gaps when we feed them correctly. And here I'm giving you a brain break. Do we have questions? Do we have comments or concerns at this point? Do broodmares require additional protein? Okay, so typically your broodmare's nutrition is not going to change very much from maintenance really until her late 3rd trimester and when she's lactating. Those are really the 2 timeframes where she really needs more support. If she is on enough of the grow and win for her size and her, for the bag instructions, she probably doesn't need extra protein. But if you want me, Trish, to look into that and double check on the requirement front, I can certainly do that. I'm not sure, I could be wrong, but I thought that the Buckeye Ultimate Finish is actually a fat supplement, not a protein supplement. So we can look into that and investigate that, because I don't know off the top of my head. But usually for broodmares, their third trimester and lactation, their energy and protein requirements are higher. But I think if she's on good quality hay and on enough of a ration balancer, she should be okay. But I can look into that if you want to shoot me an email after today. Yeah, so Marcy's made the point that if forage is tested, then you know what's missing in the diet and you can choose the best product for it. And she mentions a ration balancer. That's great. You know, I would say ration balancers, a lot of them do contain some form of cereal grain. That's the only amendment I would make to your statement, is that, you know, you're going to have some of those products in ration balancers. But remember, your cereal grains are providing nutrients to the diet. And I certainly understand people who want to stay away from cereal grains or want to pursue more of a grain-free diet. But just keep in mind that those are ingredients that provide nutrients, and that if you're feeding the correct product, like a ration balancer or even a vitamin mineral supplement, we'll talk about those in a few minutes, those can be perfectly appropriate diets for a horse that's on good quality forage and maintaining their body condition. Does temperature matter in hay? I'm not quite sure what you mean there. Temperature doesn't really matter, but the moisture does. So if you have hay that is really, really hot to the touch, I would be concerned that the moisture level in that hay is too high. And if the moisture level is over that 20%, we tend to have trouble with the spontaneous combustion and the mold issues that I mentioned. So I would say the only time that hay temperature really increases is when you have too much water in it to begin with. So moisture probably more important there. I don't know that hay temperature is really something that's included in forage tests or anything like that. But that's more of what we're looking for, is that fire hazard and the mold concern. Good questions. Are we good to keep moving, or do folks need another minute or two?
I think we're good to keep going.
All right, keep on keeping on. Trying to give some brain breaks in here. I know it's a lot and we're making it. All right, so now we get into the fun part. So now we understand who our horse is, what their individual needs are, what our goals are, and kind of how we are building this diet. So I'm not going to talk a whole lot more about forage. Really, again, my goal with your forage program, you need to feed enough of it and you need to feed good quality forage. Those are the most important things. Then we're looking at balancing the diet with a commercial feed or with a supplement product. And again, I tend to lean more on the commercial feeds front, but we'll talk a little bit about the option of supplement that I think is very valid and I would encourage people to use in a normal diet. But when we go to select feed products or even supplements, really there's kind of three things that we're looking at. The first thing that you have to be able to do is decide what type of feed that you want to feed, what brand. People can be very opinionated on feed brand. There's a lot of brands out there, and really my guidance on selecting a feed brand is that it's a personal choice. I would say be careful not to get pulled down rabbit holes of he said, she said on the internet. I see a lot of misinformation on the internet about feed brands and about how specific brands do things. People have very strong opinions about brands, but really what I would encourage you to do when you're picking a brand, look for something that is research-based. So somebody who is able to discuss with you the science behind their products, why their products are formulated the way they are, you know, if they're doing research on their own. For example, Purina has a 1,200-acre research farm in St. Louis, Missouri. They do a ton of research into equine physiology and equine digestion. So they're one that I feel really comfortable recommending, knowing that the products they design are research-backed. Other brands work with universities to do studies. There's certainly validity in that, but really just looking for brands that have the scientific basis for their products. There are products out there and brands out there that use lots of what I consider to be gimmicky marketing things, right? So they say it's a natural whole grain diet. And by all means, sometimes those are valid and sometimes those are useful, but like, to me, if that's the only thing the brand is promoting and they don't have the science to back it, that's a concern. The other thing is just a good reputation, right? Making sure that that brand is, respected for what they do, asking for opinions from people and recognizing that some people have different experiences with feeds than others. But selecting a brand is really a personal choice. There's a lot of good brands out there, and you really just have to pick things that work for you, and then also I would say logistically work, so things that are available to you. Then we need to talk about types of feeds. So I'm going to outline 4 types of feed that I think everybody should have some familiarity with, and then lines of feeds. So how do we narrow down that brand from, let's say, Nutrina to performance feeds versus ration balancers? And then how do we break that down into a Triumph line versus a Safe Choice line versus a ProForce line? So ultimately, my goal here is to help you kind of narrow down your options to make picking a product much easier. And so which ones do you pick? Again, our goal is to meet your horse's needs and your wants. We want the product to be palatable and functional. We want the horse to actually eat it. And then we want to have something that's available and affordable for you to feed. So again, kind of meshing those human needs and horse wants together. So here are 4 types of feeds that I think everybody should be familiar with. Somebody mentioned this one earlier, the ration balancer. Ration balancers are a commercial feed product that are designed to provide nutrition without adding a lot of calories. So they're kind of what I think of as like a multivitamin of the horse world. Usually our feeding rate for these is about a pound a day for a 1,000-pound horse. They've got fairly low calories, very low fat and fiber, but they tend to have higher protein. Some people get a little bit unnerved by the 28 to 30% protein, but remember, you're only feeding 1 pound of this in a day. So you're not feeding 4 pounds like you would a performance feed. So the level of protein that is actually in the diet winds up being pretty equal between this and any other of these feeds. So these are really great products for easy keeping horses that, as were mentioned, do well on a good forage program, and horses that can't eat the minimum rate of another product. So I think a lot of horses are good candidates for ration balancers, and I think more horses should be on them than are. The next feed here is a performance diet. These are feeds that are going to work well for horses that need more energy than what is provided in a ration balancer. And that's really where I make a lot of my decisions, is how much feed is this horse able to eat and maintain their body condition? Because we've all known the horse that eats like a handful of feed and gets really fat, and we've all known the really hard keeper that they're feeding and feeding and feeding that won't gain weight. So a performance diet is a diet that is going to provide the energy and protein and vitamins and minerals in a higher level, especially the energy part, than a ration balancer. Again, 2 to 4 pounds at a minimum. You can certainly feed more than that. And then these, again, they're a little bit higher in calories. Your goal here is to provide the energy. And then the protein, fat, fiber here really is variable depending on your horse's needs and your wants. Some people really love a high fat, high fiber diet. That can work really great for horses. Some people want, a lower protein content. If maybe you're feeding some alfalfa, that can be a great option. But really, there are so many performance feeds out there. They are really variable in terms of their nutrition. But really, the goal being to provide 3 to 4 pounds of this feed at least, and meet the energy needs of a horse that's a little bit of a harder keeper. I'll get to that question in just a second, Marcy. So the next is breeding and growth feeds. So these are going to be for lactating broodmares, foals, and growing horses. The feeding rate on these is usually higher. So usually we're looking at 4 to 6 pounds a day. Again, we're kind of in that moderate to high energy density. And then really with these, we're getting some higher protein, right? We're supporting the protein and muscular development of these lactating horses and growing horses. When that broodmare that we were discussing has her foal, a breeding and growth feed may very well be appropriate for her while she lactates and while that foal is growing in that first time frame. Although some foals do just as well on just a ration balancer. Again, it kind of depends on the animals we're feeding. Last but not least is senior feed, and I mean a complete senior feed. And this is a distinction that I think is really important you know how to make, is that there are complete senior feeds, and then there are feeds that are performance feeds labeled as senior feeds. A complete senior feed, if you read the instructions, is designed to replace some or all of the forage component of the diet. So something like Purina Equine Senior is a complete senior feed. There are feeds like Triple Crown Senior that can provide some of that fiber, but is more of a performance diet. It tends to be higher in calories and a little bit lower in feeding rate than a complete senior typically is. So just make sure if you're looking at senior feeds that you read the label and make that distinction, because a complete senior feed is designed to replace the fiber in the diet. And what that means is that they are lower in energy and you have to feed more of them. So usually the recommended feeding rate is between 6 and 8 pounds at a minimum and goes up from there. And you'll notice the fiber part of that diet is significantly higher than our other products. So they are great options for horses that are seniors, and we'll talk in a few minutes about feeding senior horses, but it's important that you feed them correctly, and a lot of people don't realize that that minimum feeding rate is as high as it is, and I think there are a lot of horses on senior feeds that would be better off on something like a forage supplement product like a beet pulp and a performance feed or something along those lines. We do talk about comparing guaranteed analysis in a few minutes, Marcy, so I'm going to save your question for then. So I have not forgotten you, but I am going to go ahead and move through this first. So here are some scenarios in terms of feeding classes of horses, and hopefully this helps answer some questions folks might have. If we have a maintenance or an easy keeping horse, and so by this I mean a horse that is maintaining their weight on forage alone or less than 1 to 2 pounds of feed, they're a horse that can get away with eating some lower quality forage, whether that be hay or pasture. There's really 2 things I can recommend for this horse. You can feed a ration balancer, which is usually 1 to 2 pounds a day, or you can feed a vitamin and mineral supplement. So an example of that would be like California Trace or Vermont Blend or KER or any of those. Now, this is one supplement that I do recommend. And again, the reason for it is that in this case, the difference between a ration balancer and a vitamin mineral supplement, really what we're looking at is the protein content. So if you have a horse that maybe is a easy keeping working horse that you want to make sure is getting sufficient protein, a ration balancer is usually the better option because most ration balancers have added protein in them. So they're going to provide some supplemental protein. Most of the vitamin and mineral supplements do not have added protein. Some of them do, but most don't. So really whether you need that added protein is what would make the difference in my opinion on which one you chose. And either one is perfectly fine. Just again, kind of depends on your preference and whether you need the added protein. The next class is a moderate or a harder keeper. These horses need more than that 3 to 4 pounds of feed to maintain their body condition. Sometimes these horses, if they're really hard keepers, need higher quality forage. So they need that better, more digestible forage. And for these horses, I see kind of 2 big options. And again, this depends a little bit on how much extra they need, but you can feed a performance feed. Again, minimum on those is usually 3 to 4 pounds, but you can feed more than that. Again, up to about 8 to 10 pounds a day, depending on the forage part of the diet. Or if they're not really hard keepers, sometimes we can get away with things like forage alternatives, so like a alfalfa pellet with a ration balancer or a vitamin mineral supplement included in that to help balance it. So that very much will just depend on how hard of a keeper that is, what the forage component of the diet looks like. And then I have at the bottom, you can add fat as needed to help add calories. But just keep in mind, you still need to meet the minimum recommended amount of those feed products, even if you add fat. So if you add a bunch of fat and realize that you don't need to feed 4 pounds of that performance feed, you still need to make sure that you're meeting the nutrient requirements, whether that be dropping the fat back or adding a ration balance or whatever that looks like. Okay, so just remember, fat adds a lot of calories without adding other nutrients. I have our senior horses here. There is no set age for when a horse is a senior. I think of 2 things that kind of make a horse a senior in my view. The first thing is that they are no longer able to eat or chew long stem hay or fiber anymore, so that dentition issue that most people are familiar with. And then the other case I see is horses that have been on the same diet their whole lives and suddenly just aren't doing well on it. And I would say we don't have science for it yet, but I think that we have horses that are just not getting the same nutrition out of their forage anymore. And these horses, we need to replace the forage or fiber parts of the diet. And that's really what our goal is to help supplement the fiber. So we have options here. We can do a complete senior feed. That again is the product that's designed to replace some or all of the forage in the diet. Usually we need at least 6 pounds a day of it. I once had a nutrition client who had a like 2,400, well, maybe not that heavy, like a 2,000 pound draft horse, and they were feeding that horse about 20 pounds of equine senior a day. And you can expect how expensive that was. So that's not always practical for some cases. The other alternative, again, depending on the horse's body condition, depending on how much calories they need, we can feed a forage alternative like a beet pulp with a ration balancer and vitamin mineral supplement. If the horse is in good condition, that might be an easy option. And then my personal favorite is actually to feed a performance feed, so like a high calorie, high energy performance diet at the minimum amount, and then add forage alternatives to provide the fiber. I find that that's usually more cost effective than feeding the complete senior feed and does just as well. And as with the harder keepers, we can add fat as needed for calories, just making sure that we don't drop the minimum feeding rate of our actual nutrition. Somebody asked if I have recommendations on fat. Fat gets to be a little bit of a tricky conversation because some folks are in the mindset of wanting to balance omega-3s and 6s. We don't have any scientifically proven recommendations on omega-3 and 6 in horses at this time. So I would say it depends on what your goals are. If I am trying to be cost effective and just add calories, I have no problem doing like a vegetable oil. If you're trying to get some omega-3, 6 benefits, I know people look at rice bran and flaxseed. Those can both work as well. They're a little bit more expensive to feed. They don't have quite as much caloric density to them, but they are options. And I know there's also people looking at like camellia oil and you know, all kinds of different things. And I would say for fat, it really just depends on what your goal is. It's just hard to say because without a recommendation on omega-3, 6, I think you're kind of chasing a rabbit hole that we don't know the end of yet. But if that is something that you're trying to accomplish, then there's nothing wrong with pursuing that method, if that makes sense. So I prefer just straight vegetable oils for calories. If you're doing it for other reasons, if you're trying to just get like coat quality, if you're trying to get some of that omega-3 and 6, again, flax and rice bran tend to be 2 of the kind of big ones that we talk about at this point. All right, I threw all these guys on the same slide, and I don't know that that was quite what I intended, but I wanted to just give a nod to some of our metabolic horses and our horses that have concerns about carbohydrate levels. So I kind of threw this giant umbrella on here, and I hope y'all are okay with that. Just like kind of our other horses, I think about feeding based on body condition, because feeding a thin horse that has metabolic syndrome is very different from feeding an overweight horse that has metabolic syndrome. We still need to meet these horses' energy and nutrient needs, even when we are feeding an overweight horse. The standard right now for these diets that I know of is a controlled carbohydrate level of less than 10% NSC and less than 4% starch That's specifically for those EMS type horses. And so we have some options here, and I broke it up into easier keepers and harder keepers. The first thing is you really have to test this forage, guys. You've really got to be able to know exactly what carbohydrate content is in your hay in order to do this well. And then I always recommend soaking hay for horses that are metabolically sensitive. Soaking hay can remove up to 30% of the non-structural carbohydrates. Just really useful tool, doesn't cost you any money other than the water. Yeah, I'm sure it's a pain if you live somewhere cold, but is really, really valuable as a management tool. And then most of these horses, depending on severity, we want to limit their pasture intake, particularly when we know we've got higher pasture carbohydrates. And I do have a whole talk about that as well that we can talk about. So for these horses, if we're feeding easy keepers or overweight horses, really we're trying to feed that 1.5% of their body weight in forage. We're trying to provide the balanced protein, vitamins, and minerals with that ration balancer or vitamin mineral supplement. And we'll talk on the next page why I don't worry quite so much about chasing the carbohydrates on those easy keepers as long as we're soaking hay, because usually the amount of carbohydrates in that ration balancer is so low, it's fairly negligible. But those horses need exercise. They need us to meet nutrient requirements even without providing a lot of calories. Our harder keepers in this category are much harder to feed. So we want to make sure that we're feeding at least 2% of body weight in forage or more. Again, soaked, again, best quality we can get. We can feed low carbohydrate performance diets to these horses in some cases, depending on how sensitive they are. But we do need to be really careful about our feeding rates. And we'll talk about why that's important on the next slide. And then sometimes here we can do forage alternatives and that ration balancer or vitamin mineral supplement with fat for calories as needed. And again, some of this just depends on how sensitive your horse is. Some of it depends on how underweight they are, you know, and it depends on what's available to you in terms of forage and all that. So really our goal trying to be to maintain the forage quality and the forage amount, and then supplement the calories and the protein, vitamins, and minerals as we can. I know math isn't everybody's favorite, but I wanted to make this point because I think it's relevant, not just for carbohydrates, but kind of for a lot of feeding principles. You have to make sure that you do some of the math when we talk about nutrition. And you can do the math yourself, or you can call someone like me, and I'll happily go down that rabbit hole for you. So if we're talking about carbohydrates, if we have a 1,000-pound horse that's eating 25 pounds of feed in a day, he can eat roughly 1,135 grams of carbohydrates to stay under that 10% threshold. Okay, so that's kind of his baseline of where we're trying to keep this horse at. If we feed an average Bermuda grass hay, this value is from the Equine analytical feed analysis library that they have, that is 13% carbohydrates. He's already over what he's able to eat and stay below 10% in his diet. So he's already 1,180 grams. So if we soak that hay, we drop that down to 944 grams. So soaking that hay is really critical. And if you come to me with a metabolic horse and you are trying to chase the feed tag to the lowest carbohydrate possible, and you are not soaking your hay, I'm gonna ask you to soak your hay first. Then we have just some examples on the bottom. The reason I said a ration balancer usually isn't a big issue is that if we feed 1 pound of a 15% carbohydrate ration balancer, we're feeding roughly 70 grams of carbohydrates, and that fits into this diet with the soaked hay just fine. That's not an issue. So usually ration balancers with soaked hay are not too terribly big of a problem. And then I have 2 feed examples here, and I just put them here to illustrate how the number on the tag has to be used in conjunction with the amount that you have to feed. So these diets are what we call isocaloric, meaning they are the same amount of calories. We have Old Team Competition, which is 16% carbohydrates, and then we have the Calm and Easy, which is 13.5% carbohydrates. And if you're looking straight only at the carbohydrate levels, you're going to pick the Calm and Easy because it's lower, but you have to feed more of it to get the same calories, and you ultimately wind up feeding more carbohydrates because of it. Whereas if you feed the Ultium, even though it's higher on the tag, you feed less of it, which means the overall carbohydrate level is lower. So my point here just being, you have to run the numbers, you have to do the math based on how much you're feeding in order to really understand the overall picture of what that diet looks like. The next thing, I don't want to go real in depth into this, but every brand has different feed lines. These are a family of products in a company, and different lines are going to vary in their technologies and their price point and their feeding rates and all of those things. So for example, we have Purina's got the Impact line, then they have the Strategy line, they have the Omalines, they have the Ultiums, they have the Impact Professionals, and all of those are kind of families of products that all have differing technologies and price points. And I break feeds down into economy feeds, mid-grade feeds, premium feeds, and super premium feeds. And a brand might produce just one of these. So like Triple Crown is a super premium product. They don't produce anything that is not super premium. Whereas some companies like, Nutrina, Purina, Poulin, they're going to do all 4 categories. And when you're looking at feed lines, you really just need to make some decisions around what is going to work for your horse and what you want. So if you can afford economy feed products, they're usually formulated for horses. I am going to tell you, don't feed an all stock product. But if you need to feed like an economy stock and stable, then by all means, feed it according to the directions on the label. Do the math, because if you feed it according to the directions, it's not always cheaper than feeding a mid-grade product is. But if that's what works and you've got kind of an average horse, that can be great. That's not an issue. But if you're really someone who cares about technology and formulations and ingredient quality, then you're going to be looking at these premium and super premium products. Okay, so before you go into a store, just have an idea of what price point you want to be in and what technologies you're looking for. And those will be kind of your 2 guidelines that'll put you in a specific tier of feed. That also means that you can then compare across brands, because, for example, comparing a Proforce Fuel to an Ultium, those are different classes of feeds to me. They've got very different technologies, they're very different price points, and they don't perform the same way. So I don't think that's an apples to apples comparison. And it certainly means that, if one of those works great for you over the other, that's awesome. I'm happy to hear that. But let's make sure that you're comparing across brands, apples to apples. So first is having a brand, then is having a family of products you're looking at, and then is picking the product itself. And so once you've kind of narrowed through this, like the type of feed you want, the line of feed you want, the brand you want, you really shouldn't have a lot of choices anymore. You should be fairly narrowed down within what's available to you. So how do we compare these products objectively against each other? So this is where it gets a little bit tricky, because guaranteed analysis is it's a regulated document on every feed product. So there are 9 things that are required to be on the guaranteed analysis, and there's a lot of stuff that is not required. And I often see people say, well, this brand has added amino acids on the feed tag, so it's got to be better. It means the other product doesn't have those. And that's not accurate. That's not necessarily true. Just because something is on a label doesn't mean that it is in a level that is beneficial to your horse. Just because something is not on the label doesn't mean it's not in the feed. I saw a post the other day of somebody asking why feeds didn't include all of the essential amino acids. And we had to have a conversation around the fact that a good quality protein, even if they only list crude protein and lysine on the feed tag, there's still going to be other amino acids. They just didn't list all 10 of them on the tag. And the reason for that is usually related to regulation, right? So if they don't put it on the feed tag, they are not going to be held to it in a court of law or in a regulatory way. So just be aware of that. Be a little bit critical of what is on a feed tag. Recognize the things that are required to be there versus the things that they might put on there to either be nice or to make their feed look like it's important. You know, I know there's some feeds that put joint supplements in the feed now, and it's on the label, but it's not fed at a high enough rate to be effective. So it's on the label, it's great from an appearances standpoint, but it's not actually functional. The other thing, so somebody had asked about the differences between protein and why we have to be a little cautious about crude protein. And the reason for that is that crude protein is a measure of nitrogen. So it is not actually measuring the quality of the protein. It is just measuring the amount of nitrogen in the feed, which is a big component of that protein. So just because a feed product has, you know, 14% crude protein doesn't necessarily mean that that protein is really good quality. So when we look at protein quality, we are looking at whether the amino acid profile of that protein matches what the horse needs. So we've got 10 essential amino acids. We know that lysine is the amino acid that we need in the highest amounts. So you will see lysine on a lot of feed tags. And again, the reason for it is that we need it in the highest quantity. Beyond lysine, we don't have these proven yet, but we think it's methionine and threonine are the next two. So every once in a while, you'll see those on a feed tag as well. But ultimately, when it comes to protein, we're looking for feeds that have high quality protein ingredients. And we're going to talk about those on this next slide. So when we look for protein, we want to consider the protein on the label, yes, right? So most mature horses, even in light work, can get away with a 10 to 12% protein if they're in good quality forage. Really, most horses don't need much higher than 14 unless they're lactating. But we want to look for ingredients like soy. And I know soy is a hot topic in the horse nutrition world right now. Some people really like soy, some people really don't. Soy has an amino acid balance that matches what the horse needs. It is the best quality protein that we have right now other than whey. So it's why that is the high that's why that's the ingredient for protein. That's why it's in almost every feed product. We don't have any other options really at this point that are as high of a quality. So maybe something like linseed. Sometimes feeds might use individual amino acids, so we might add a lysine or methionine or something like that to help improve protein quality, but soy really is the gold standard. And unless your horse has a true diagnosed allergy and intolerance to it, there's no reason why you shouldn't feed a soy protein in the feed. But again, looking at protein quality is related to ingredients. Those are some of the things that I would look for. But also keep in mind that most horses that are on good quality forage usually are not protein deficient. And if you are really concerned about protein quality, there are some supplements that provide amino acids that are useful and that I think are valid. So you could supplement on your own some of those individual amino acids to help improve your protein. Energy is not published usually. Sometimes you can find it on the company's website. And the reason it's not published is that there's not a universal method of finding energy values. But I would encourage you to use energy in your comparison. So if you work with me, I have a spreadsheet of a bunch of commercial equine feeds, and I can talk to you from an energy standpoint, like I did in that carbohydrate example of why you can feed less of one product over another. But that's usually not a published value, so it's a little bit hard to compare unless you call and ask about it. Fat, you know, as we discussed, if you're looking for specific fat sources like flaxseed or rice bran, that can help you make a decision between one feed and another. Just keep in mind that just because a feed has higher fat in it doesn't necessarily mean it's higher energy. There is a feed out of a brand in the Northeast that is like 14% fat, and it is not high in calories at all. And I actually don't really know how it works that it's that high in fat and not high in calories. So just keep that in mind that, you know, when we talk about fat, could mean more energy, but also we might be looking at specific sources for some of those benefits of omega-3s that we talked about earlier. Fiber, again, low NDF and high ADF is our digestibility measure. Looking for sources like alfalfa or beet pulp or wheat midds or anything like that. Those can be good fiber sources, good digestible fiber. Sugar and starch, if you do not have a metabolically challenged horse, you may not need to worry about sugar and starch. There's no definition at this point that is a low carbohydrate diet for horses other than those that are diagnosed with medical problems. So a lot of people say, well, I want low carbohydrate, and I want to know what that means to you, because that's going to be an owner want or a personal preference, so long as your horse is not diagnosed with an issue. Most horses do fine on carbohydrate levels between 15 and 25%. I personally try to stay between 15 and 20, but again, you've got to think about the whole diet. You have to consider the forage part of it, which is usually going to provide far more carbohydrates than anything you're going to provide as feed. Then anything extra, so as I said, technologies, probiotics, biotin, any of that, remember that just because it's on the label doesn't mean it benefits the horse. And finally, logistics. And I hate to say it, but can you get the feed, and is it cost effective? And that leads us to feed cost. I promise we're almost done. You guys are doing great. We have Strategy Healthy Edge and Ultium competition. And Strategy Healthy Edge is a cheaper feed per bag and per pound. So it's about $24.25 based on this number, 49 cents a pound. And it's about 1,300 calories a pound. On the other side, we have Ultium competition, which is almost $10 a bag more expensive. So it's $33.49 a bag, it's 67 cents a pound, but it's higher in calories. It's 1,900 kcal. And in this example, the minimum feeding rate for these products is 3.5 to 4 pounds. So it doesn't, beyond that, we're meeting the minimum. It really doesn't matter how much more we have to feed. We're feeding for calories at that point. So we can feed 8.7 pounds of the Healthy Edge to meet that caloric density that I have there, or we can feed 6 pounds of the Ultium. And so the Ultium, even though it's $10 more a bag, you feed 2 pounds less, more than 2 pounds less, and it ultimately is cheaper to feed per day. So it's only $4.02, whereas because we have to feed more of the Healthy Edge, we're feeding more expensive, right? So $4.26. So Strategy Healthy Edge is a cheaper bag from a price per bag, price per pound standpoint, but it's lower in energy and we have to feed more of it to get the same amount of calories, which means that it's more expensive to feed. From an annual basis, we have to feed 20 bags more of the Strategy Healthy Edge than we do the Ultium. And ultimately what we're looking at is about an $80 difference. It's more expensive to feed the Healthy Edge. And so I know I'm kind of hurrying at this point because we've been here a long time, but my bottom line is that the cheap feed is not always cheap. So you have to do the math and talk about your feeding rate and the cost over time in order to really understand the value of what you feed. So just keep that in mind, do the math, call me, I'll do the math, and understand that cheap does not always actually translate to being less expensive. All right, last thing is give it time. So this is the #1 problem that I have with most of my nutrition clients is that they just don't give it enough time to work. You have to give any change to the diet a minimum, bare minimum of 60 to 90 days. If you can wait longer, that's even better. And that's for body condition changes. Other changes, things like coat quality or hoof quality, take even longer. So just keep in mind that you have to commit to this diet and be committed for at least a couple of months. And during that time, don't make a bunch of other changes. That's the other thing. I'll have somebody like change a diet, then 30 days later, change something new, and then half a month later, change something else. And at that point, we no longer know what change made the difference. So just make the changes and then give it enough time to do what it's supposed to do. Now, obviously, if your horse starts like dramatically dropping their body condition or like being a raging dragon every day, then certainly we can do something about that. But for the most part, you need to just make the change and leave it alone. So big concepts here are feed changes should be driven by horse need and human wants. If you don't have a good reason, I would not recommend making big changes. Make sure that when you're looking at feeds that you're comparing apples to apples, that you're comparing things that are fairly similar, and then know that your feed cost is the cost per pound of the feed you buy multiplied by the feeding rate you have to feed every day. And make sure that you do that math so that you understand what your actual cost is when you compare feeds. And then don't rush the process. Take your time. We have time. If you're looking for more nutrition information, as I said, I'll send out some stuff after today so that you have some of the talks we've been referencing. You can use the NRC for horses, which is great. We can look at university publications and presentations. Those are going to be a EDU web address. Make sure that you're looking at those. And if you do look at those, look at what year they're from. You know, I've seen some publications that are 20, 30, 40 years old. And that doesn't mean they can't be useful, but you want to take that information with a grain of salt and look for modern references as well. You can look for peer-reviewed research using Google Scholar. I really recommend that, but I think if you've not really been taught how to read a research study critically, those can be a little bit difficult for lay people to understand. So definitely look for them. And my supplement talk, I talk a lot about finding and vetting information, so I will send that out, but just maybe take some of those with a grain of salt, or know that they're a little bit tougher to understand than things that have been written for the public. Social media can sometimes be good, it can sometimes be terrible. I would recommend looking for groups that require scientific or research-backed information. So the Equine Wellness and Nutrition group is really, really great. They require everybody to have a scientific basis for their recommendations. So you're not allowed to just log in and say, well, this solved all my problems, I love it. You have to have some backing to it beyond that, especially if you make a claim about an ingredient or product. So look for resources that are fairly scientifically proven. And then otherwise, I just like to ask who's making the recommendation. What are their backgrounds? What's their qualifications? Who do they represent? You know, are they getting a kickback for a product? Because that does happen. And are they qualified to have the conversation with you? And then what's the logic behind it? So if somebody recommends a product, why are they recommending it? What kind of information and research is there about that product? And can they explain why, like physiologically, they're recommending that? Again, so kind of why is that the recommendation? And if they can't give you a good why or any science behind it, then take it with a grain of salt. Marcy asked that I emphasize the need for gradual dietary changes. So that's definitely important, even with forage. You know, we talked about that microbiome of the horse. The microbiome in that cecum and then the gastrointestinal tract is adapted to your horse's diet. So if you go ahead and make massive changes to the diet really quickly, then the horse's microbiome winds up having issues with those populations. They get angry, and then the horse can get ill from that. So we do want to make sure that we make changes fairly slowly. You know, I think the recommendation varies based on who you talk to. I know some colleagues that say a minimum of a month to transition feeds. I think it depends a little bit on how similar the products are. So obviously, if we're going from like a 40% carbohydrate sweet feed over to a forage-only diet, then yes, that's going to take a longer, more gentle transition. But if we're going from, you know, a performance feed that's fairly similar to another one, I think we can do it fairly reasonably in about 10 to 14 days. But just make sure if you do make dietary changes that you do take your time in doing it and do that slowly. All right. So I'm going to stop there. I know this was long. Thank you guys for sticking with me and hanging in here. I hope this was useful to you. As I said, we're going to send out some other resources. She dropped my email address in the chat there, so we are in good shape there. I think you should be able to click that link there. That has recordings to all of our webinars that we've done, as well as a bunch of educational-based resources for you. So why do feeds contain molasses? All right, so first off, let's recognize that the molasses that you and I think of is not the molasses in feeds. So the molasses that we have in our kitchens has a much higher carbohydrate content than the molasses used in feed products. The molasses that is in feed products, I believe, is less than 10% carbohydrates, but I would have to double check that, so don't hold me to it. But they get kind of the after product of what we use. So it's not super carbohydrate heavy. It's not as sweet as what you would expect. And they use it for palatability, primarily palatability, and also for like dust control. So it's something that they can do to help remove some of the dust in the feed, makes it a little bit more palatable for the horses. And ultimately, it's in very low inclusion rates, meaning there's not much of it in feeds. Again, I'm going off memory here, but I want to say it's like less than like 2 or 3% molasses in most feeds. So it's really not in at a high level. But I do know that some people get very concerned about it. If I was worried about carbohydrate content, I would be more apt to be looking at the non-structural carbohydrate level of that diet and really evaluating that in conjunction with my forage program. Okay, other questions? You are all more than welcome. Okay, transition to grazing and change in pounds of hay given. Yeah, so I didn't talk a lot about grazing because grazing is really difficult to quantify. We have some science that says a horse will eat about, I'm not going to be able to pull these numbers out of my brain. We have a hard time quantifying exactly how much grass a horse will eat in a period of time. And the reason for that is that a horse that is out 24/7 has different grazing behavior and intake behavior than a horse that is out for 6 hours, 2 hours, whatever it might be. We do have science that says your horse that you turn out for an hour actually eats the same amount as a horse that is out all day. They just kind of scarf it down because they're so afraid of losing it. So really understanding grazing is a little bit difficult. I tend to be a fan of, if you are feeding horses who are outside 24/7 and you are usually throwing hay or have a round bale, you can start decreasing that amount when you notice the horses are not consuming it as readily, right? So we've all seen horses that have a beautiful giant round bale and are grazing the teeny tiny little green sprigs over in the pasture. And that's really when I start thinking you can start decreasing how much you're offering. And I'm hoping that's answering it. If you're talking more about introducing outside grazing and hay, again, it's tough because are we talking about really good quality growing pasture? Are we talking about kind of scrubby, overgrown, overgrazed pasture? All of those things are going to influence it. And I really don't have a great guideline for that other than keeping really close eye on body condition. If you're in these transitional spring to summer type phases or winter to spring where you guys are most likely, I'm really recommend body condition scoring once a week, once every 2 weeks. It's probably excessive. You're probably not going to see big changes like that. But then as you start lowering that hay, I do a pound a day, 2 pounds a day, and just see kind of how it goes over that time frame. I hope that helps answer that. That's a tough question. Awesome. Well, thank you guys. Feel free to contact me anytime. I'm happy to help with specific questions you have about cases you're working with. Whatever I can help you do, I'm happy to be a resource for you. And hopefully you took something away, and we'll get you some resources later this week.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Robin. This was amazing. We are going to pop your fighting with this. There we go. This is all of Robin's contact information. And she dropped her email in the chat again. We will also put this screen up on our Facebook event, so you can always refer back to it. And Does anyone have any other questions to ask? And it sounds like we will be sending a lot of links and information to everyone in their email, as well as sharing it on our website and in the Facebook event. So we know that a lot of you have come to us through Facebook, and it makes it so easy to share this really valuable information and get accurate information out there. So we're very happy that Robin has given us so much information. We are still confirming next month's speaker. So please do check back with us in a few days. But for those of you who are local, we do have some upcoming events. As always, we have our shop and stroll days. Our tack shop is open, which is full of wonderfully unique donated items. So I know this winter we were very popular with everyone who needed some extra horse blankets right around Christmas. And that will be on March 26th. In April, we're actually having our Tackapalooza. If you have cleaned out your tack supplies or perhaps got a new horse and a new saddle and don't necessarily need to hang on to the old one, please visit our website and register for a table. So you bring your items, you purchase a table space, and you sell your goodies. Our tack shop will also be open. We will also be doing trailer consignments. We know how crazy it can get with schedules to drive around and try to coordinate and meet people. So we're offering an option to have everyone bring their trailers to our farm, and you can look at them all at once. So go ahead and visit our website. And then finally, we are very pleased due to a grant from the American Association of Equine Practitioners to offer large animal rescue operations training in May. That is open to the public. However, first responders will be given priority registration because they are our first call when something happens. But please visit HAHS.org/event to register for that. And finally, just a reminder that all of these sessions are recorded and available on YouTube to be shared. And that is sort of a look at our library. So we are very lucky that we have so many experts that have taken the time to share their expertise with us. So we have 12 episodes, which are perfect for rainy days or perhaps just to listen to as you do barn chores. And a year ago in March, we talked to farrier Heather Boscheman about hoof care, and certainly what we learned today, and it sounds like Robin probably has a presentation on it, on how what our horses eat affects their hoof quality and growth. So I think we'll be seeing a lot more of Robin because I know I want to see all of the presentations that she has mentioned. So don't forget to click the subscribe button so you get a notification when this episode and future episodes get uploaded and are ready to share. So Robin, we do have one question, as all good podcasts and webinars do, that we like to ask all of our guests. And that question is, what was your favorite book when you were a child?
Oh, can I get it? Can I go grab it for you? It's called The Secret Horse by Marion Holland, and it's about two teenagers who go kidnap a horse from a humane society and keep him in an abandoned property behind mirrors.
Yes.
And I
Yes.
still have it. I bought another copy because I lost my childhood copy, and I love it.
Oh my gosh, that is fantastic. Oh, that's wonderful. Well, thank you so much for that. I love that you ran to go grab it. That is wonderful. Um, that's fun. So we appreciate everyone joining us today. Please tell people about our series. We are trying very hard to make this information available to whomever can use it and need it. And I think no matter how long you've had horses, there is always something to learn. I've learned something from every one of our episodes. We will see you back in April, and we hope you have a great rest of your weekend. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.